once hailed for compassion, was left speechless and cornered by the facts. This wasn't just a legal takedown. It was a live dissection of a judge who used mercy as a mask for misconduct. But what did Jasmine say that made even Congress stop breathing? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The chamber pulsed with silent dread. Lights glared overhead like interrogation lamps. Cameras blinked red in every corner, unblinking, unmerciful. Reporters perched on the edge of their seats, hands hovering over keyboards like snipers waiting for a signal. Lawmakers exchanged glances, some wary, some already sharpening their knives behind folded hands. ICE agents lined the sidewall in stiff formation, their uniforms crisp, expressions blank. Civil rights observers packed the rear, jaws clenched, arms crossed. Every breath in the room felt borrowed. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a pressure cooker seconds from rupture. Then came her voice, low, steady, lethal. Jasmine Crockett didn't stride in. She sliced through the tension like a scalpel. No theatrics, no anger, just a terrifying calm. She placed her notes down with surgical precision and looked straight ahead. "We're not here to destroy a name," she said, every word landing like a hammer in a quiet church. "We're here to defend the rule of law, or admit it's meaningless." Her voice didn't need volume. It had gravity. The room stilled. Pens stopped. Chairs didn't creak. Even the ICE agents leaned ever so slightly forward. It was the kind of silence that didn't happen in government buildings, the kind that meant something was about to break. And then all eyes turned. Slowly, collectively, the entire chamber swiveled toward the witness chair. There sat Judge Hannah Dugan, once the one who gave the verdicts. Now she was the one waiting for one. And just like that, the room shifted. From watching Jasmine to watching the woman who once held the gavel. The silence thickened, not with awe, but with the weight of what was about to be said. Judge Hannah Dugan stood slowly. No robe, no elevated bench. Just a black blazer and a face that had aged more in the last week than in the last 5 years. She walked to the witness table with quiet dignity, the kind that doesn't beg for sympathy but still demands respect. Every footstep echoed like a countdown. The air was tighter now, like the oxygen had been measured and rationed. Jasmine didn't move. ICE agents watched with clenched jaws. The civil rights lawyers leaned in, waiting to see if the woman some once admired would fold or burn. A clerk swore her in. Her right hand rose without hesitation, and when she sat down, she didn't adjust the mic or clear her throat. She just spoke. "Yes," she said with eyes steady. "I instructed my bailiff to open the west corridor." The admission dropped like a hammer, sharp and final. "Yes, I knew federal officers were waiting outside. Yes, I knew they were there for Mr. Ortega. And yes, I made a decision to help him leave through another door." No lawyer present could miss what she was doing. She wasn't fighting the accusation. She was owning it, but not to surrender, to make a point. She leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but pointed, like someone reading a verdict only she understood. "I made an ethical choice in a moment that lacked basic humanity. That's not a mistake. That's what conscience looks like when the law forgets how to feel." No apology, no excuse. Just belief, raw and absolute. Around her, pens began to move again. Journalists caught the phrasing, but the room still hadn't recovered. And then came the line that froze everything in place. "I don't regret it," she said. "I'm not here to plead for forgiveness. I'm here because I did what the law wouldn't." The room didn't explode. It just tightened. Jasmine's face didn't change, but her hand, unseen beneath the desk, curled slowly into a fist. Because now she knew. This wouldn't be a hearing. This would be a war of definitions, between law and conscience, order and mercy, and it had just begun. And that's when Jasmine leaned forward, slow, deliberate, as if the calm in her voice might be the most dangerous weapon in the room. She had listened. She had allowed the silence after Dugan's final words to stretch, like a wire pulled taut, waiting to snap. But now it was her turn, and the air shifted again. No outrage, no dramatics, just precision. She reached for a folder stamped with the seal of the Department of Justice and opened it without looking down. Her eyes were locked on Dugan's, and her voice was surgical. "Title 8, Section 1324 of the U.S. Code, she began, each syllable clear as steel. It is a federal crime to knowingly harbor or shield an undocumented individual from detection or apprehension by federal authorities. She let that sentence sit, not like a hammer, but like a hook. You may call it compassion, Judge Dugan, but the law calls it obstruction. Around the room, you could feel the tension coil again. Some lawmakers shifted in their seats. A few ICE officials finally blinked. The temperature hadn't changed, but the hearing felt colder. Jasmine flipped a page, her fingertips steady. Let me remind the committee of 3 prior incidents in which interference with federal enforcement inside a courthouse resulted in serious consequences. Her voice didn't rise, but the weight of her words grew heavier. 2018, San Francisco. A local magistrate delayed ICE officers from detaining a man with a violent criminal record. He vanished. Days later, he was arrested for attempted murder. 2021, New York. An immigration judge ordered courtroom doors locked during a federal raid. That same day, an ICE agent was assaulted outside the building by the man they failed to apprehend. Jasmine paused, just long enough. In 2022, right here in Wisconsin, a courthouse exit was blocked to prevent an ICE pickup. That agent later testified under oath that he feared for his safety due to what he described as judicial interference. She snapped the folder closed with one hand. We are not dealing with abstractions, she said, voice still calm, but unmistakably harder now. This isn't about feelings. This is about precedent and consequence and the principle that no judge, however well-meaning, is above the structure of law. The words echoed with more force than volume. The chamber had gone still again. Jasmine turned her gaze back to Dugan, and what came next was not an accusation. It was a narrowing, a tightening of the lens. You made a choice, Judge Dugan, a personal one, but you made it from a bench built by the Constitution. That bench is not yours to rewrite. That hallway you opened wasn't a shortcut to justice. It was an exit from accountability. Dugan didn't flinch. She didn't blink. But something behind her eyes shifted, almost imperceptibly, a hairline fracture in the foundation of certainty. And yet, she answered without hesitation, voice quiet but firm. I know what I did, she said, and I would do it again. Her hands rested on the table, palms down, no trembling. Because I chose people over procedure. I chose human dignity over a system that forgot how to see it. There was no apology in her voice, no regret. But this time, her words didn't command the room. They defended a corner of it, and Jasmine stepped into the center of that space, not to destroy it, but to expose what it cost. But Dugan didn't retreat. She didn't counter with statutes or case law. She reached for something older, more primal. The chamber was still thick with the aftermath of Jasmine's legal volley, when Dugan leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the witness table. Her voice dropped, not in volume, but in tone, stripped of defiance, stripped of defense. What remained was raw, almost too human for the courtroom. Luis Ortega was not a criminal, she began. He wasn't fleeing charges. He wasn't armed. He wasn't hiding. She looked straight ahead, not at Jasmine this time, but beyond her, into the faces of the lawmakers, the press, the stone-faced ICE officers. He was a father, a quiet man who worked 2 jobs and still walked his kids to school when he could. His wife is a nurse who worked through the height of the pandemic. She wore garbage bags when there weren't enough gowns. A few heads turned, a few pens slowed. They paid taxes. They followed every requirement their status allowed. They were waiting for a court date, a chance to stay. But that day, ICE wasn't waiting to hear their case. They were waiting to end it. Dugan's voice didn't tremble, but the weight behind it cracked something open in the room. Luis looked at me before I recessed that hearing, she said, her fingers curling slightly on the table. Not with fear, with understanding. He knew the law wouldn't see him. It would process him, package him, ship him. His kids were 6, 8, and 10. That morning, he braided his daughter's hair before court. He kissed his wife on the forehead and promised he'd be home for dinner. Her voice paused, the silence screaming in the gaps. He never would have made it out the front door. One congresswoman to the left lowered her head. A senator shifted in his seat, his eyes glassy. The air wasn't just still now, it was fragile. If saving a father is wrong, Dugan said, eyes unwavering, then the law must answer to its own cruelty. The moment sat heavy. Reporters hesitated to type, afraid the keys might shatter it. On the far end of the chamber, someone sniffled. Another cleared their throat too loudly, as if to mask emotion they didn't want to own. The ICE agents remained stoic, but even they weren't breathing as easily. The story had landed. It hadn't just painted Luis Ortega as a man, it had painted everyone else in the room as human too. That was Dugan's skill, not in argument, but in memory. She didn't plead, she resurrected. And for a split second, it felt like she had taken the moral high ground back. But Jasmine didn't let the chamber drown in sympathy. She let it breathe just long enough, then struck. With slow precision, she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder, marked with no seal, no government label, just one word in block letters, confidential. The air shifted again. Chairs creaked. Reporters leaned forward as if instinctively drawn to blood in the water. Jasmine held the file like a weapon, her fingers tight around the edges. She didn't wave it. She didn't raise her voice. She simply opened it, revealing a stack of internal memos, handwritten annotations, redacted summaries, and inter-office email chains. Dates, docket numbers, rulings all tied to one name, Judge Hannah Dugan. She began reading. Case 14702, charges dropped without prosecutorial consent. No explanation entered into the record. Flip. Case 16-883, defendant, personal acquaintance of the court, received probation for a second DUI offense despite mandatory minimum guidelines. Flip. Case 19-021, closed-door sentencing. No documentation provided to the Judicial Review Committee in violation of Wisconsin court reporting standards. Flip, flip, flip. With every page turned, the sound grew heavier, like steel being laid on stone. I have here, Jasmine continued, her voice calm but surgical, more than 24 cases over the last 8 years where your courtroom decisions bypassed legal standards. Some were never reported, some were quietly erased, but all bear one thing in common. They favored people you knew, or people who could help you. She looked up, her stare like a sniper scope, and none of them were Luis Ortega. Dugan didn't move, but the breath in her chest seemed to stall. Her fingers, once neatly clasped, twitched against the table. She tried to speak, but Jasmine wasn't done. You say you acted out of compassion, she continued, but where was that compassion when the defendant was a teenage girl with no priors and no family? You sentenced her to 6 months for shoplifting. Another page flipped. Where was that compassion when a black man with no attorney missed a hearing because of a hospital stay? You signed a bench warrant, and he spent 3 nights in holding. Another. Yet when a former assistant district attorney's son crashed into a parked car while intoxicated, you quietly had the charge reclassified as reckless driving and sealed the file. The silence that followed was suffocating. The room wasn't moved anymore. It was cornered. Every eye that had glistened moments ago was now narrowed. Jasmine leaned in, folding her hands over the open file, her voice a low knife. This isn't about Luis Ortega. This is about your pattern, your choices, the way you wrapped favoritism in velvet and called it mercy. She pushed the file slightly forward on the desk, just far enough for everyone in the room to know it existed, and that it was damning. You didn't defy the law once. You built a shadow court beneath it. She let the words hang there, heavy and irreversible. Dugan looked stunned, only slightly, but to those who knew courtroom rhythm, it was enough. A hesitation, a skipped breath, a flicker of fight replaced by something close to calculation. Jasmine sat back slightly, her posture still as marble. So, Judge Dugan, she asked, her voice smooth, final, and loaded with iron, when exactly did compassion give you the right to hide your own pattern of abuse? There it was, the cut that landed deeper than all before it. No rebuttal, no file in Dugan's hands. Just silence, and the slow, terrifying realization that the very thing she had weaponized to defend herself was now being used to undo her completely. Compassion had a cost, and Jasmine Crockett had just sent the bill. The silence that followed Jasmine's last question was thick enough to choke on, but she didn't leave space for Dugan to recover. She moved in, not with volume, but with precision, her tone tighter, her delivery faster, like a prosecutor peeling off gloves and going bare knuckle. "Let's talk about patterns," she said, voice cool as glass. "Because if this is about compassion, then compassion should be consistent, predictable, blind." Her eyes stayed locked on Dugan's, but her voice aimed at the entire room. "Why, Judge Dugan, does your mercy seem to know faces and names? Why does it stretch wide for a wealthy financial advisor from Waukesha with multiple fraud charges, but slam shut on a teen immigrant caught selling vape pens at a high school lunch table?" She didn't blink. "Why does a friend of the family walk free with deferred prosecution, while a woman fleeing domestic violence gets 30 days for missing a court date?" The questions came like body blows, fast, unrelenting, and exact. Jasmine leaned closer now, not to intimidate, but to corner. "You say you opened a door for Luis Ortega out of conscience. Fine. But where was that conscience when ICE came for Fatima Rezai, a refugee mother who'd been in your courtroom 2 months earlier? She was arrested in the parking lot. You saw her crying in the hallway. You said nothing." Jasmine flipped another document, a photo clipped to the top. "Where was your compassion when a disabled Iraq veteran, a naturalized citizen, was dragged out by ICE after you ignored his attorney's request for a motion delay? He missed a brain scan scheduled that week. He collapsed in custody." The room wasn't breathing anymore. Jasmine's voice didn't need to rise. It slashed just as hard in a whisper. She let the silence stretch now, but this time she controlled it. Then, with the slow cadence of someone nailing the final plank on a coffin, she asked, "Tell us, Judge, what exactly was your system? Who got mercy? Who got silence? And why did so many people in need never find the door you claim to have opened?" Her hands rested lightly on the table, but her words hit like a gavel. "Because from here, it doesn't look like compassion. It looks like access." And in that moment, Dugan didn't seem like a judge. She looked like a gatekeeper caught holding keys she wasn't supposed to have. The shift in the room was slow, but unmistakable. A few minutes earlier, Judge Hannah Dugan had the entire chamber leaning in, eyes soft, shoulders dropped, hearts cracked open by the story of a father and his 3 children. But now, after Jasmine's pointed questions and the weight of the evidence laid bare, that warmth was gone. The silence wasn't reverent anymore. It was suspicious, and Dugan could feel it pressing in on her like a closing door. She tried to steady herself, straightened her back, lifted her chin, but her voice, when it came, didn't carry the authority it once had. I made the decisions I believed were right at the time," she said. It was the kind of sentence meant to sound firm, but came out soft, like a crack in glass. Her hands, which had been so still before, now moved nervously, adjusting a sleeve, brushing the table, gripping the edge of her chair. "Not every case is the same," she continued, eyes darting from one face to another. "There are things you don't always see in the paperwork, details, circumstances." She was rambling now, trying to fill space she used to control. "When you're on the bench, sometimes you have to make calls that feel right in the moment," she said, but her voice shook on the word right. "I didn't favor anyone. I looked at who they were, what they were facing, and she paused, took a breath. "I tried to use judgment. Isn't that what being a judge is about?" Her tone was pleading now, not powerful, but the room didn't answer. Lawmakers looked down at their notes. Reporters stopped typing, not out of respect, but because there was nothing sharp left to catch. Even the ICE agents, unmoved before, now seemed more alert, less neutral. The mood had shifted from emotion to calculation, from empathy to doubt. Dugan tried one last time. "I didn't open any back door for friends," she said quickly. "I mean, yes, some people I knew came before me in court, but I didn't treat them differently. I swear I didn't." Her voice caught slightly, and that catch, more than anything she said, rang loudest in the silence. And still, Jasmine said nothing. She just sat, calm, composed, watching Dugan unravel in front of everyone. Because sometimes the truth doesn't have to be shouted. Sometimes you just let someone keep talking, until their own words bury them. But Jasmine wasn't done. She had let the silence hang just long enough to let the discomfort grow. Then she reached forward, slow, steady, and picked up a second folder from her desk. It was thinner than the last, marked only with a red tab. "Let me make this simple," she said. Her voice was calm, but everyone in the room knew what was coming next. "This isn't my opinion. This is data, verified. Federal." She opened the folder slowly. Even the sound of paper shifting felt loud. "According to records from the Federal Judicial Review Program," she began, her eyes fixed on the witness table, 87% of Judge Dugan's lenient rulings in the last 8 years were given to people with either personal or professional connections to her. She let that number settle. 87%, she repeated sharper this time. "That's not coincidence. That's a pattern." Lawmakers stirred. A few froze mid-note. The warmth that had once filled the chamber had been replaced by something colder, heavier. "Let's call it what it is," Jasmine continued. "It wasn't compassion. It was connection." Dugan didn't respond. Her hands were still folded, but now her fingers were knotted tight. Jasmine reached again into the folder and lifted a small digital recorder. "I'll now enter into the record an audio statement collected during an internal review by courthouse staff," she said. The speaker is a long-serving court clerk from Milwaukee County. She worked under Judge Dugan for over a decade. She pressed play. A quiet voice filled the room, steady, tired, and real. "She didn't do it out of kindness," the woman said. "She did it because she owed them. She felt she had to pay people back. Friends from the DA's office, old allies, people who helped her rise." Click. The playback ended, but the weight of those words stayed. Dugan didn't say a word. Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. She wasn't nodding. She wasn't shaking her head, just staring at the table, frozen in place. The judge who once commanded a courtroom now looked like someone trying not to collapse inside her own skin. Her shoulders rose, then fell, slowly. Still, no response. Jasmine leaned in, not to attack, but to finish what she had started. Her voice lowered, almost like she was speaking one-on-one. "This was never just about Luis Ortega," she said. "It wasn't just one door you opened." She paused. "You built an entire hallway for the people you knew, and you locked it to the rest." She sat back, silent again. The room didn't explode. It didn't have to. Every person inside already understood what had just happened. The chamber didn't move. Not a breath. Not a cough. Not even the sound of a pen scratching paper. The folder was still open in front of Jasmine, its pages exposed like wounds. Across the room, Judge Dugan sat motionless, her hands clasped too tightly, her knuckles pale. Her gaze didn't lift from the table. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. The woman who had once commanded silence now seemed afraid of it. The chair of the committee, a silver-haired congressman from Illinois, cleared his throat softly. It was the only sound in the room. "Judge Dugan," he said, voice calm but firm, "do you have any response to the data presented?" His words hung in the air like a challenge, polite but impossible to ignore. Dugan didn't answer. She didn't look up. Her eyes stayed locked on the grain of the wood before her, as if the answers were hidden somewhere in its grooves. Seconds passed. 1, 2, 5. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. For the first time in the entire hearing, she had no language left. The chair gave her space. But still nothing. A few heads turned toward Jasmine, expecting her to press the advantage, to strike again. But she didn't. She didn't need to. Instead, she sat forward, folding her hands calmly on the table. And when she spoke, her voice was so quiet it almost didn't belong to a courtroom. But it cut through the room like steel. "That silence," she said, steady and clear, "speaks louder than any ruling you've ever signed. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't performative. It was surgical truth. Clean, undeniable." The air shifted, no longer tense but final. Like a room where the verdict had already arrived, even if no one had spoken it out loud. Dugan didn't argue. She didn't protest. She didn't defend. She just sat there, shoulders curled inward, ever so slightly, her eyes distant. Whatever was behind them, rage, grief, regret, it never made it to the surface. Only silence did. And somehow, that was louder than anything she could have said. The committee chair exhaled slowly and looked down at his notes. He didn't speak again. Around him, lawmakers who had earlier nodded at Dugan's pleas now looked blank. Neutral. Cold. A few shuffled their papers without purpose. One took off their glasses and began to clean them, just for something to do. The weight of what had just happened made everyone want to move, do anything but meet her eyes. Reporters, who had once been scribbling furiously, now paused. One slowly capped their pen. Another leaned back in their chair and looked at the ceiling like they needed a second to process what they'd just seen. Even the ICE agents, who had maintained blank, unreadable stares throughout the day, seemed to lean forward ever so slightly, as if taking note not of a criminal, but a collapse. Judge Hannah Dugan didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just sat there, no longer the center of the room, but the outline of something that used to be. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't gloat. There was no pleasure in this moment, only weight, only the cold understanding of what accountability looks like when all the excuses run out. She let the silence continue, because she knew that sometimes silence is not absence. It's impact. It's truth sitting in the space where a lie once tried to stand. And in that silence, everyone understood. There would be no rescue, no final defense. Dugan had come to this hearing believing she could justify what she had done, that if she told the right story, crafted the right moment, people would understand, forgive, forget. But that story had unraveled. The moments had turned against her. And now the one thing that had once made her powerful, her voice, had abandoned her completely. The room remained still for a long beat. No one came to her defense. Not one lawmaker cleared their throat to break the tension. Not one former colleague rose to say she was misunderstood. Whatever support Dugan had carried into the chamber had been stripped down, inch by inch, and now there was nothing left to protect her but silence. The chair tapped his pen once on the desk. Soft, slow, final. "This hearing will continue," he said quietly, but with finality. "But it appears we've heard all we needed to." And with that, he moved on. But the rest of the room, it would stay in that moment a little longer, frozen in the quiet downfall of a woman who had once stood above the law, and now sat alone beneath its weight. The silence inside the hearing chamber was no longer just silence. It had become something heavier, like fog in a locked room. Even breathing felt like a choice. After everything that had been said, after the data, the recording, and Jasmine's final quiet blow, there was nothing more to argue. The air didn't crack. It didn't shatter. It simply waited, like the space before a final note. And then slowly, Judge Hannah Dugan moved. She didn't ask to speak. She didn't wait for permission. Her hand rose from the desk like something weighted, something that had been holding still for far too long. She reached toward the microphone, hesitating for half a breath. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from knowing this moment would end everything she had spent a life building. The microphone clicked softly as she leaned forward. Her eyes didn't lift. Her mouth barely moved. But her voice, low, steady, plain, filled the chamber. "I resign," she said. 2 words, no buildup, no preamble, just the kind of truth that doesn't need drama to carry weight. She didn't lift her head. She didn't justify it. There was no official statement, no carefully crafted legal defense, no final appeal to empathy. She didn't offer excuses because there were none left to give. She had been a judge for over 20 years. But in that moment, she wasn't a judge. She was just a woman at the end of something too broken to fix. The room didn't react. Not right away. It couldn't. It was as if everyone had just heard something they didn't know they were waiting for. Something that had been crawling beneath the floor of the hearing since the first word was spoken. And then she looked up. Not at the chairman, not at the cameras, at Jasmine. Their eyes met. Steady, level, unflinching. Not a glare, not a plea. Just a moment of shared awareness. 2 women from 2 different worlds who had crossed in this room for a reason neither of them had chosen, but both had followed through. And then Dugan spoke again, only once. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said softly, her voice carrying no force, no judgment, only truth. "I thought I was serving justice. I was serving myself." That was it. No more lines, no tears. No emotion curling the ends of her voice. Just the hardest thing a person in power can admit. Not that they failed, but that they convinced themselves they hadn't. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything that had been exposed, everything that had been torn down, and nothing else needed to be said. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't move. For a second, she just looked at Dugan, face calm, hands still on the table. No gloating, no satisfaction. She had asked the questions. She had pushed. But this wasn't a victory. Not for her, not for anyone. It was something colder, something deeper. The closing of a door that should have been closed a long time ago. Then she dropped her gaze and slowly began gathering her materials. One folder at a time. No rush, no performance. Just the quiet, careful movement of someone putting truth back into its container. She stacked her documents, closed her notebook, clicked her pen. Everything was precise, respectful, but final. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at the cameras. She wasn't waiting for recognition. She wasn't waiting for anything. Behind her, the room remained motionless. A lawmaker rubbed their forehead. Another tapped a pen but didn't write. Someone cleared their throats softly, more out of instinct than need. No one said a word to defend Dugan. No one reached for her as she pushed back her chair. And when she stood, she didn't straighten her back or raise her chin. She didn't reclaim authority. She didn't try to look proud. She just stood, tired, older, smaller than when the hearing began. She turned without a glance, without a wave, and walked slowly down the center aisle. Alone. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. She had brought the full weight of her career into that room, and it had collapsed under the weight of her own truth. And still, Jasmine said nothing. She didn't even watch her leave. She simply lowered her hands into her lap. The papers now folded, the file closed, the job, however painful, done. There was no applause, no sound. Because when justice truly lands, it doesn't roar. It settles, quiet, unmistakable, and permanent. The door clicked shut behind Judge Dugan, but the weight of her absence lingered like smoke after a fire. For a few long seconds, the chamber stood still, not in reverence, but in processing. The silence wasn't hollow. It was stunned. The fall they had just witnessed wasn't noisy or violent. It was quiet, devastating, and it had landed on every person in the room. Jasmine Crockett remained seated at the witness table. Her hands were folded, her notes neatly stacked, her posture still. The job was done, but justice never felt clean. It felt like a wound that stops bleeding only because it has bled enough. Slowly she stood. There was no rustle of applause, no movement, just the sound of her chair sliding back into place. A small, final sound in a room full of unspoken truths. She walked calmly toward the committee panel, her heels echoing lightly on the polished floor. Her pace was even, controlled. Every step was weighted with the truth she had dragged out into daylight over the past 4 hours. As she approached the microphone again, the press leaned in. Lawmakers braced themselves. Some instinctively sat straighter. The weight was shifting, away from what had fallen and toward what still stood. Jasmine didn't pause long. She didn't look for effect. She didn't need to. When power chooses favorites, she said, her voice clear, firm, it stops serving the people. The sentence dropped like a stone into still water. No echo, no frills, just impact. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calmness was its own kind of authority, and every person in the chamber knew it. She glanced once around the room, not for praise, but for confirmation that what had been exposed was not just seen, but understood. She continued, "The law is not a door we open for those we like. It's the same door for everyone. Simple, devastating, complete." And that was all she said. A second passed, then another, and then the room erupted, not from lawmakers or officials, but from the people. In the back of the chamber, a ripple of applause broke free, first hesitant, then firm, then louder. Reporters who had spent the last hours scribbling notes now lifted their heads and clapped. Staffers from civil rights organizations, silent until now, stood and joined them. The gallery didn't explode into cheers. It rose in respect. Applause not for a performance, but for a truth that had landed. The chairman didn't stop it. He didn't try. For the first time that day, he smiled. Faint, tired, but real. Cameras flashed, phones recorded, journalists typed headlines in real time. Crockett redefines the bench, the fall of Dugan, the rise of accountability, a door for everyone. Jasmine's final words echo through Congress, but Jasmine didn't bask in it. She simply stepped back from the microphone and returned to her seat. Her shoulders relaxed, but her face stayed focused. For her, this wasn't the end of a hearing. It was the beginning of what had to follow. Because justice, real justice, doesn't end with applause. It begins with what happens after it. She glanced once more at the empty seat where Judge Dugan had sat. It was still warm, and now it belonged to history. It didn't take long. Before Jasmine had even made it home that evening, the hearing footage had already gone viral. Clips from C-SPAN and phone recordings flooded social media, edited and amplified with overlays, quotes, and slow-motion loops of one moment. Judge Dugan saying, "I thought I was serving justice. I was serving myself." It was everywhere. Primetime news anchors were cutting their planned segments to show the hearing in full. Editorials were being rewritten in real time. The world had just seen something rare, a powerful figure fall not from indictment, not from scandal, but from the quiet collapse of her own justification. But it wasn't Dugan who dominated the headlines. It was Jasmine Crockett. Her final line was on every screen. "The law is not a door we open for those we like. It's the same door for everyone." The words weren't dramatic. They were devastating in their simplicity. A few thousand tweets quoted her within the hour. A few million followed by sunrise. Someone stenciled it in spray paint on the side of a courthouse in Detroit by noon. T-shirts, pins, posters. She didn't ask for it, but it came anyway, like a wave cresting over the political shoreline. News outlets lined up instantly. MSNBC ran the Chiron. Crockett delivers the gavel strike heard round the country. CNN ran a split screen of Jasmine and Dugan, titling it, "The Reckoning at the Bench." Meanwhile, conservative media fired back with force. Fox News called it a witch trial in a pantsuit. One host warned, "If unelected staffers like Crockett can tear down a judge with a few sentences, no one in power is safe." There were calls for ethics reviews, ironically of Jasmine, but public momentum didn't swing their way. Outside the Capitol, supporters had already gathered with signs. "Justice has a new voice. One door, one law." A mother held her daughter's hand and whispered, "That's what standing your ground looks like." For a moment, just a moment, truth didn't feel like a lonely thing. It felt shared. Still, not all the reactions came with cheers. In committee back rooms and private caucus halls, conversations turned colder. Jasmine had stepped on nerves, powerful nerves. Some of her own colleagues, who had smiled quietly during the hearing, now avoided her in corridors. A senior Democrat leaned in during a hallway vote and said in a low voice, "You made waves. Just don't drown in them." She said nothing back, not because she didn't have a response, but because she had heard that tone before. Some wanted her quiet, others wanted her louder, but she wasn't changing either way. She kept walking. That weekend, she received over 6,000 emails. Her team had to disable her public voicemail inbox by Friday night. The words varied, but the message echoed. "I saw you. You gave us a voice. My daughter wants to be you. My son finally believes the system can change. Thank you for showing the law still matters." But with the praise came another layer Jasmine knew well. The weight. Because being right in a moment doesn't mean you get to walk away from what follows. It means you have to walk deeper into it. The headlines wouldn't last. The attention would move. But the wound they had opened, that would stay. So would the responsibility to make sure it healed right. By Sunday, she was back in her district. The local church invited her to speak. She declined. Not out of pride, out of exhaustion. Instead, she sat in the back pew during the morning service. Sunglasses on, head low. When the pastor spoke of justice and humility, his voice cracked once. Jasmine felt it like a bruise. Later that evening, she stopped by her father's old house. It was quiet now, just a few pieces of furniture and a chair that still creaked when you sat in it. She didn't turn on the lights. She just sat by the window, phone on silent, and stared at the street. Sometimes power collapses in fire. Sometimes it just slips out the back door and leaves you holding its shadow. She thought of Dugan, and for the first time since the hearing, she whispered aloud to the room, "You didn't have to go like that." But maybe she did. Maybe that's how the truth works. It doesn't demand an ending. It just forces a choice. Jasmine had made hers. Now the world would have to decide what to do with it. The sky over Washington was still dark when Jasmine unlocked her office door. She didn't need to be there that early. No meetings scheduled, no cameras waiting, no emergencies brewing. But sleep hadn't come, and the silence of morning was safer than the noise of praise. She stepped inside alone, set her coffee on the desk, and let the light from the window spill across the floor like a question no one had asked yet. The room smelled faintly of paper and peppermint. Her chief of staff hadn't arrived. No footsteps echoed in the hallway. The Capitol felt like a ghost of itself before 7 a.m. Clean, quiet, unfinished. That's when she saw it. A single white envelope sat in the center of her desk. No name on the outside, no markings, just paper. Clean, unassuming, a pale rectangle of unknown weight. Taped beside it was a yellow sticky note in her chief of staff's handwriting. Found this in the drop slot, no return address. She stared at it for a few seconds without moving. Her mind flicked through possibilities. Press, protesters, threats, thanks. But something about its stillness, its lack of anything performative, felt different. She picked it up gently, as if the paper might say something before she even opened it. She broke the seal. The letter inside was handwritten, blue ink on soft-lined paper. Careful cursive, measured spacing. It looked old-fashioned, like someone who didn't trust typing with thoughts that mattered. She read the first line, and her breath caught before she could stop it. "I know this won't change anything," it began, "but I need you to know I saw it now, not in the courtroom, in your silence." It wasn't signed yet, but Jasmine already knew. Judge Hannah Dugan. She sat down, letter still in hand, and kept reading. "I believed I was helping people," it continued. "That's what I told myself. That's what I told others. But when I watched myself through your eyes, when you made me see it, I realized I wasn't serving justice. I was choosing comfort, familiarity. I had created my own version of fairness, and I convinced myself it was truth." Jasmine leaned forward, elbows on the desk, eyes never leaving the paper. "I didn't see how much I had edited the law until you held the mirror steady. When I opened that hallway for Luis Ortega, I told myself it was compassion. Maybe it was. But where was that door when the poor came through? When the unknown came through? When no one reminded me of someone I used to know? There were no flourishes, no self-pity, no branding, just the kind of clarity that comes after everything else has fallen away." Jasmine swallowed hard and kept reading. "You didn't break me in that hearing. You didn't need to. You made me look at what I'd built and who I'd locked out of it. I never hated the law. I just got used to deciding when it should bend. And that's not mercy. That's ego dressed as grace." Jasmine looked up for a moment, letting the words hang in the room like smoke. Then she looked back down and finished it. "You were right. Power doesn't belong to people. It belongs to the people. And I forgot that." There was a pause between the final lines, like Dugan had stopped writing and breathed before continuing. "I won't ask for forgiveness. I'm not owed that. But I hope someday we build better doors." That was it. No signature, no date, just ink, just truth. Jasmine held the letter in her hands for a long time, her eyes fixed on the last line. She could hear the hum of the Capitol waking up, footsteps outside, phones ringing, the clatter of morning routines. But inside her office, the silence remained untouched. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She folded the letter once, carefully, and slid it into the second drawer of her desk, the one where she kept her oath of office and an old photo of her father. In it, he wore a city bus driver's uniform and a tired smile. He used to say the law was something built by people who never had to ride in the back. She reached into the drawer, touched the edge of the photo, then closed it softly. Dugan had been right about one thing. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't fast. It didn't come with applause. It came in silence. And in that silence, Jasmine felt something settle. Not peace, but purpose. She rose, rolled her shoulders back, and reached for her notebook. There was work to do. Better doors to build. It began, like most revolutions in Washington, with a draft. Jasmine sat alone in her office that evening. Long after the halls had emptied, the cleaners had come and gone, and even the lights of the Capitol dome flickered under the pressure of night. A soft desk lamp cast a golden circle across the pile of handwritten notes, policy printouts, and legal briefs scattered before her like puzzle pieces without borders. The letter from Judge Dugan remained in her drawer, unopened since the morning she'd read it, but its words echoed all around her. I hope someday we build better doors. That sentence wouldn't let go. She had seen what a courtroom could become when discretion lost its boundaries. She had witnessed what silence could do when wrapped in authority. The question now wasn't whether Hannah Dugan had failed. That was done. The question was how many others were doing the same, and how many systems made that failure not an exception, but a pattern. That's what this moment demanded, not punishment, reform. So she began. She called it the Equal Access and Justice Act, not because it was poetic, but because it was plain, unmistakable. The law would do three things. First, it would require all federal and state-level judges who exercise non-standard discretion in sentencing, dismissal, or post-trial relief to report those decisions to a public transparency board. Second, it would establish a real-time audit system that flagged disparities in treatment, not just by race or income, but by affiliation, connection, or deviation from precedent. And third, most controversially, it would initiate independent ethics reviews of sealed or undocumented court proceedings involving defendants connected to the judiciary or prosecution through prior professional networks. No one had proposed anything like it, and that's why she knew the knives were coming. The moment the bill was submitted for committee review, the temperature changed. Her office lines jammed with angry calls from state judicial associations. Columnists accused her of wanting to chain judges to a calculator. One former appellate judge told NPR that Jasmine was trying to algorithm away the soul of justice. But she didn't flinch, because she'd already seen what happened when that soul went unchecked. She remembered the clerk's voice on the recording. She did it because she owed them. She remembered Dugan's own confession. I thought I was serving justice. I was serving myself. She remembered Luis Ortega and the thousands like him who never had a hallway to slip out through. So she wouldn't walk it back. Still, the resistance was louder than she expected. From the left came concern about judicial independence. From the right came open hostility. A few lawmakers who had praised her courage after the hearing now sent quiet emails urging her to slow it down, rethink the language, or worse, let this moment breathe. They told her not to push a bill so soon, that people needed time. But Jasmine knew the truth. Delay was a weapon, and silence, once again, was the accomplice. So she did what she always did when the noise got too loud. She went back to the district. Houston's streets welcomed her with familiar humidity and cracked sidewalks. At the corner of 4th and Main, she visited a nonprofit immigration center where Luis Ortega's wife now volunteered. The woman hugged Jasmine tight, eyes full but dry. They sent him back, she said simply, but he made it safely. He said to tell you thank you. He said you were the only one who saw him. Jasmine didn't respond. She just held her hand and nodded. Then she went to the Black Law Students Association at her old alma mater and read the first page of her bill aloud. When she looked up, a young woman raised her hand and asked, "Congresswoman, how will you stop them from bearing it in committee?" Jasmine smiled. "I won't ask," she said. "I'll bring it to the floor." On the day of the proposal, the Capitol was packed. The gallery was full. Press credentials had run out by noon. Outside, demonstrators on both sides held signs, some accusing her of trying to federalize fairness, others lifting placards that read, "Equal access now and doors for all." The chamber lights were harsh but clear. Jasmine stood at her desk in the center of the house floor, flanked by pages holding printed copies of the bill. She wore a navy blazer, no jewelry, and the pin her father used to wear when he drove bus route 55 down 3rd Ward. She pressed the button on her desk mic, and then she spoke. "Madam Speaker," she began, "I rise not just on behalf of my constituents, but on behalf of every American who has sat in a courtroom and wondered why the law bends for some, but never for them." The room was still, not quiet from disinterest, but from focus. "This bill," she said, lifting the first page, "is not a punishment for judges. It is a promise to the people, a promise that justice will no longer hide behind sealed doors, familiar names, or polite favors. It is a promise that we will no longer confuse discretion with favoritism, that we will no longer allow relationships to weigh more than records, that the courtroom will return to what it was meant to be, a public square, not a private corridor." She paused just long enough for her words to settle. "I want every American, regardless of race, income, or affiliation, to walk into court and know one thing: the rules will not shift because someone knows someone. The judge will not lean back in favor because they shared law school professors. The sentence will not shrink because the name is familiar." A rustle from the Republican side. She kept going. "I know some of you are afraid of this bill," she said, "afraid of what it asks us to face. But the only people who fear transparency are those who've lived too long without it." That one hit. A few lawmakers flinched. She delivered the final blow with the same quiet strength that had carried her through the hearing. "This isn't just about what happened in one courtroom. It's about what happens in too many, and what happens when the people lose faith that the law is theirs too." She folded the bill. She stepped back. No theatrics, no smile, just truth. The applause didn't come right away, but then from the gallery someone rose, then another, and slowly they clapped. No roar, just a rising pulse of hands meeting in steady, deliberate rhythm. Below the chamber in a small courthouse in Milwaukee, a woman who used to be a judge watched the live stream from her kitchen. Her hands were wrapped around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. And when Jasmine's voice rang out for the last time, "One law, one door, for everyone," she nodded, not as a judge, but as a citizen, as one of the people. As the final echoes of applause faded from the chamber, the world began to breathe again, but not in relief. It was something deeper, something heavier. The sound wasn't just in honor of a speech, it was in recognition of a truth too long buried. Jasmine Crockett stood still at the edge of the floor, not soaking in praise, but carrying the weight of everything that had brought her to that microphone. A broken system, a crumbling bench, a judge who thought she was saving justice while feeding her own reflection. But when the cameras powered down and the crowds filtered out, what remained was not policy, it was clarity. And with that came the question every nation must ask itself, in the quiet after reckoning: what did we learn? The answer didn't fit in headlines or hashtags. It lived in the spaces no one wrote about. The crack in Judge Dugan's voice, the stillness in Jasmine's hands, the breath caught in every throat when silence fell heavier than thunder. The lesson was not that justice could be restored with a vote or a speech. It was that justice had to be watched by everyone all the time, because the moment we stop looking is the moment power starts choosing itself. The first lesson was this: compassion without accountability becomes favoritism, and favoritism in the hands of power becomes a weapon. Judge Hannah Dugan did not set out to become unjust. She didn't wake up with malice in her heart. She believed in mercy. She believed in helping people. But what she failed to see, what Jasmine forced her and the country to confront, is that when mercy is given selectively, it is no longer mercy at all. It is bias disguised in kindness. It is power disguised as empathy. And it breaks the very thing it was meant to protect. The human truth was simple. A system built on rules cannot survive if those who enforce them feel entitled to break them for the people they like. The second lesson was harder. It was about silence. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the silent kind. The slow erosion of oversight, the quiet passing of privilege, the shrug of a courtroom door opening for one man while slamming shut on another. Dugan's silence wasn't just in the hearing. It had lived in her courtroom for years. in her sealed decisions, in her unreported favors, in the names she didn't remember because they didn't remind her of anyone she knew. And that silence, left unchecked, had become a structure, a hallway, a gate, built for the familiar, guarded against the forgotten. That was the world Jasmine walked into when she sat in that hearing chair. She didn't just face one woman, she faced a culture that teaches us to excuse power when it's polite, that teaches us to call injustice an exception, that tells us to keep quiet when the people who break the rules are the ones who wrote them. She refused, and in doing so, she uncovered the third and most painful lesson. Justice is not fragile, but truth is. Truth doesn't explode. It erodes. It erodes under the pressure of denial, of delay, of comfort. And when it does, people stop believing. They stop filing complaints. They stop reporting wrongs. They stop entering the courtroom expecting fairness. They stop voting. They stop hoping. But Jasmine gave them something else. Not a happy ending, a hard one. And hard truths, when told out loud, can become bridges. They can become blueprints. They can become laws. The message at the center of it all, the one that cracked a judge, passed a bill, and moved a country, was not complicated. It was this: the law cannot be personal. It cannot be given in exchange for a favor or withheld because of fear. It cannot be shaped by guilt or memory or old friendships hiding behind black robes. It must be consistent. It must be seen. And it must be earned. Justice is not a feeling. It is a door. And if it does not open the same way for everyone, then it is not a door. It is a wall. That was the message. And Jasmine carried it with her, not as a speech, but as an oath, because she knew what it had cost. She had felt the pressure to stay silent. She had walked into the fire of backlash. She had watched allies distance themselves, pundits distort her name, and old friends warn her to be careful. But she did not bend, because truth without courage is just a whisper, and courage without truth is just noise. What she showed the world, what she reminded the country, is that dignity does not come from position. It comes from purpose. And power, when stripped of ego, can still serve, if it chooses to. In the months that followed, as her bill worked its way through the committee system and ethics boards reevaluated long-buried cases, Jasmine didn't give another speech. She didn't publish a memoir. She didn't sit for every interview. Instead, she visited courtrooms, small ones, forgotten ones. She listened to public defenders, to single mothers on benches, to translators trying to explain bond conditions in languages no one else in the room spoke. She didn't need applause. She needed perspective. Because the real work always was not in the moment the door swings open. It was in making sure it stayed open. For everyone. And maybe someday a future lawmaker would sit in that same chamber, decades from now, and read her words again. Not to remember the fall of a judge, but to remember what rose in its place. A principle, a standard, a promise, that justice is not what we feel, it is what we choose. Every single time we walk through that door and make sure no one is left behind. And now the weight of that promise shifts off the page, off the floor of Congress, and into the hands of everyone listening. Because justice doesn't end with a gavel strike. It begins with the people who hear it and decide what to do next. Jasmine Crockett did not step into that hearing room to be applauded. She stepped in to draw a line, to remind a country drunk on comfort that silence is not neutral and compassion without scrutiny is still corruption. She exposed a rot so quiet it had learned to sound like mercy. And then she stood in front of the nation and said, "No more." But that moment is not enough if it stays frozen in headlines, if it is not followed, if it is not demanded. So now the door she pried open must become yours to walk through. If you believe that the law should not favor the connected over the voiceless, then speak, not someday. Now write to your representatives. Demand transparency in your courts. Demand auditability in your justice system. Ask the questions no one wants to answer. Who gets mercy in your town? Who gets silence? If you believe that judges must be held to the same standard they enforce, then fight. Demand public tracking of judicial outcomes. Demand that discretion be a tool of fairness, not favoritism. Show up to town halls. Show up to hearings. Be the eyes that systems fear. And if you believe, truly, that power must belong to the people, not hover above them, then act, not with rage, but with resolve, not with spectacle, but with stamina. Run for school board, join legal aid, vote in the off years when no one is watching. Teach your children that justice is not a symbol, it is a responsibility. Jasmine walked through fire so you wouldn't have to, but that fire is not gone. It burns in every sealed courtroom, every unrecorded deal, every hallway that only opens for the familiar. And the only thing that will extinguish it is you. You who refuse to look away. You who demand a system not built on favors, but on fairness. You who understand that real justice is not what happens when someone powerful falls, but what rises in its place. So don't wait for another story like this one. Write the next one with your voice, your vote, your vigilance, because the door is open now. The question is, who will walk through it? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. Thousands watched in shock as Jasmine Crockett's microphone was cut, live, on stage, for daring to speak the truth about systemic injustice. Before anyone could react, Yara Shahidi stood up, grabbed the second microphone, and delivered a single sentence that shook the entire summit. Within 48 hours, their act of defiance sparked global outrage and forced the world to pay attention. What began as a speech became something no one could silence. Jasmine and Yara Shahidi spoke when others stayed silent. Would you have had the courage to do the same? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The envelope was crisp, white, and heavy, the kind of paper that smelled of importance and old money. On its face, in embossed gold, were the words, "The National Youth Summit for Justice." Inside was an invitation bearing Yara Shahidi's name, addressed with a formality that felt more ceremonial than sincere. She had been asked to deliver the keynote on youth and democracy at a high-profile conference in Washington, D.C., an event sponsored by the Civic Horizon Foundation, a group that claimed neutrality but had quietly funneled funds into conservative media circles for years. Her fingers lingered on the name of another guest speaker, Representative Jasmine Crockett. A chill of excitement ran down her spine, but before she could reply, her manager, Terrence, a veteran in political PR, stepped into the room with a narrowed gaze and said flatly, "You need to know what you're walking into." Terrence dropped a folder on the table, its contents sliding out like classified evidence. Inside were articles, leaked emails, and testimonies from past speakers, most of them women of color, who had been silenced mid-panel, had microphones accidentally cut off, or were edited out of promotional videos after mentioning systemic racism. "They want your face," he said. "They don't want your voice." Yara's jaw clenched. She'd been here before, offered a spotlight but told which angles to stand in. She looked back down at Jasmine's name. That woman didn't soften her voice for anyone. The question now wasn't whether she could make a difference. It was whether she was willing to risk everything to try. She folded the letter slowly, like it might break if she moved too fast. Her voice was low but certain. "I'm going," she said, "but I'm not going to be quiet." Backstage was colder than she expected, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. The lighting buzzed overhead with sterile indifference, and production staff floated past with clipboards and forced smiles, eyes flicking to Yara like she was furniture to be arranged. The dressing room was a maze of partitioned spaces, sleek but soulless. She followed the signs to the green room, pulse steady, heels clicking with quiet defiance. And then she saw her, Representative Jasmine Crockett, seated alone on a leather bench, reviewing a folder filled with handwritten notes and legal tabs, her brows furrowed in silent determination. No entourage, no makeup artist, just her and the truth she came to carry. Yara hesitated for half a second before walking over. Jasmine looked up, sharp, direct, but not unkind. There was a recognition in her eyes as if she already knew why Yara was here. "Did they brief you on the rules?" Jasmine asked, not bothering to say hello. Her voice was low, calm, and lined with something heavier than frustration. "They don't like it when we say things that sting." Yara smiled, not out of amusement, but resonance. "They invited my face," she replied, "but warned me not to bring my voice." Jasmine exhaled through her nose, a sound that was half a laugh, half a scar. "You'll fit in just fine then." In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not friendship yet, but an understanding built on shared battles. Jasmine closed her folder and leaned forward, eyes narrowing with clarity. "Last year I testified about racial disparities in sentencing. I used statistics from the DOJ, government sources. My mic cut out 2 minutes in. They called it a technical glitch. CNN never aired it, but a video from someone's phone went viral. That's the only reason anyone knew it happened." She paused, then added, "They don't kill you with bullets in these rooms. They kill you with silence." Yara sat down beside her, no longer unsure. "That's why I'm here," she said quietly. "Not for the panel, for the fight." Jasmine nodded slowly, measuring her. "Then they'll try to push you out before you ever step in." The green room door creaked open, and with it came a flash of camera lights, followed by the tight click of heels and the artificial enthusiasm of a local TV reporter, blonde and polished, already mic'd up. She didn't greet them so much as approach like a shark sensing blood. "Ladies," she said brightly, "before the panel starts, can I ask just one quick question for our pre-show coverage?" Jasmine's expression froze. "Depends on the question," she said, tone flat. The reporter smiled wider, fake and sharp. "Do you think constantly bringing up race helps unify young Americans, or does it just keep reopening old wounds?" The question dropped like acid on silk, a trap dressed as curiosity. Jasmine didn't answer right away. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes narrowed. Not out of fear, but calculation. It was the kind of question designed to corner a black woman and turn her into a headline, no matter how she answered. But before Jasmine could respond, Yara leaned forward, calm and steady, her voice clear and sharp. "That's a strange question," she said. "Would you ask a veteran if talking about post-traumatic stress disorder is just making things worse? Or do you only expect black women to stay quiet so others can feel more comfortable?" The reporter hesitated. A flicker of doubt crossed her face. Behind her, the camera crew shifted awkwardly. Jasmine didn't say a word. She just turned slightly, watching. Yara kept going. "These wounds were never healed," she said, still composed, "because the system keeps hurting us. And if talking about it makes people uncomfortable, maybe the real question is, who's still holding the knife?" The room went silent. Not the kind of silence meant to shut someone down, but the kind that said, "We heard you." The reporter quickly muttered a thank you and backed away, her confident steps suddenly unsure. Jasmine looked at Yara with a steady, thoughtful gaze. She didn't smile. She didn't clap. But when she finally spoke, her words said more than either of those things could. "It's been a long time since someone stood up for me like that." Yara nodded, her voice soft but certain. "You don't have to stand alone anymore." The moment they stood together, the ground beneath them began to shift. And in the shadows, someone decided it was time to push back. The email came without a sender, no subject line, just a message sitting in Yara's inbox like a ticking clock. "If you defend her, you'll fall with her." That was it. No greeting, no sign-off, no attachments. Just a threat, sharpened down to its simplest form. Yara stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the delete key but not pressing it. The timing wasn't a coincidence. This came less than an hour after the green room moment, after her words sliced through the air and left a reporter scrambling for cover. Someone had been watching, and they weren't just offended, they were afraid. She didn't forward it. She didn't mention it to her team. She just closed the laptop, stood up, and walked back to Jasmine. Jasmine was pacing when she arrived, her phone held out as if she didn't want to touch it anymore. "We've got a problem," she said flatly, not even waiting for hello. She handed Yara the screen. It was a PDF, internal documents, likely leaked, with the watermark of the Civic Horizon Foundation on every page. A section titled Speaker Control Measures was highlighted in red. Beneath it, a bullet list. Limit Crockett to prepared remarks. Cut feed if she references systemic bias, law enforcement disparities, or racial injustice. Avoid camera close-ups during off-script commentary. Yara read it twice, her chest tightening with each word. This wasn't subtle censorship. This was calculated erasure. They hadn't just invited Jasmine to speak. They had scripted her into silence. A door creaked nearby. The moderator's prep room. The original host, a neutral-faced journalist known for her measured tone, was being escorted out. In her place, a man stepped in, Leonard Hayes, former press liaison to two conservative senators, known for smiling while steamrolling over dissent. Yara didn't need to Google him. She remembered his interviews, the kind where activists walked in hopeful and walked out gutted. Jasmine's expression hardened. "They've replaced the moderator," she said. "He's here to control the narrative, not host a dialogue." Yara didn't reply. Her jaw was set, her hands clenched. This wasn't a discussion panel anymore. This was a trap in designer lighting. Security presence around the venue quietly increased. Jasmine noticed it first. Two new guards posted near the side hallway, now restricted for technical use only. The producer, who had once been warm and chatty, now avoided eye contact. Yara received a gentle reminder that her time on stage had been reduced from 12 minutes to 6. No explanation, just a schedule change. Jasmine's mic was tested 4 times. The final one cut off halfway through. "Another glitch," they said. Everything felt normal until you looked closely. Then it all felt rigged. Back in the dressing room, the air was heavy, like before a storm. Jasmine sat, elbows on knees, staring at the floor. "They think if they box us in, we'll either self-censor or snap on camera," she said, voice low but steady. "Either way, they win." Yara was quiet for a moment, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small voice recorder. She placed it on the table. "Then let's give them something they didn't script." Jasmine looked up, eyes locking with hers. "You sure?" she asked. "Because after this, there's no walking it back." Yara didn't blink. "If they're going to cut the mic, we better say something worth cutting." It wasn't about rebellion anymore. It wasn't even about exposure. It was about truth, and the price of carrying it into rooms that weren't built for it. They didn't rehearse. They didn't plan a dramatic stunt. They just sat across from each other, two women in full control of their words, deciding together that silence was no longer an option. Outside the door, assistants were preparing their next moves, sponsors were polishing their optics, and someone, somewhere, was probably crafting another anonymous email. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was what would be said when the lights came on, and more importantly, what would still echo after they tried to shut it down. They didn't say, "Don't speak." They just built a stage where truth wouldn't survive the microphone. The lights dimmed to a soft gold as Jasmine stepped onto the stage, the applause polite, almost programmed. She moved with quiet command, every step a statement, every breath sharpened by the storm she knew was coming. Behind her, the Civic Horizon logo glowed like a seal of approval, but Jasmine knew better. That light wasn't permission, it was surveillance. She approached the podium with the poise of a trial lawyer, papers in hand, but her eyes locked with the crowd, not the script. She wasn't here to play their game. She was here to burn the rule book. "My name is Representative Jasmine Crockett," she began, her voice calm, but weighted like a blade kept under wraps. "And I came here today not just to speak, but to say the things too many rooms like this were built to erase." The first few lines drew polite nods, the kind that lives somewhere between agreement and expectation. But Jasmine wasn't interested in polite. Her tone shifted, slower, deeper, as she continued. "If we're going to talk about justice, we have to start with the truth, that our legal system is not broken. It was built this way. It doesn't fail everyone equally. It targets, it profiles, it punishes selectively. This is systemic discrimination." Then, without warning, her microphone died. No crackle, no fade, just silence, the kind that slices mid-sentence. Her lips moved, but no sound reached the audience. She paused, tapped the podium, glanced at the mic, then looked directly at the tech crew backstage. They avoided her eyes. The moderator, seated stage left, stood quickly, forcing a smile so tight it looked stapled in place. "Looks like we're having some technical issues," he said, voice rising over the speakers Jasmine no longer controlled. "We'll just pause briefly and allow our next speaker to step forward." He turned toward her with a hand gesture wrapped in fake courtesy. "Congresswoman Crockett, thank you for your remarks." Jasmine didn't move. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, her silence now louder than any speech. Her eyes scanned the crowd, some confused, some frozen, others quietly understanding exactly what they had just witnessed. This wasn't a glitch. This was a muzzle, and the message couldn't be clearer. The moment you name the truth, we pull the plug. But just as silence began to settle like a verdict, another voice rose, not from the podium, but from the edge of the stage, where defiance had been waiting its turn. Yara didn't wait for permission. She didn't ask. She moved. From her seat near the side aisle, she stepped forward with purpose, slipping past two stunned coordinators who reached for clipboards but said nothing. In one smooth motion, she picked up the handheld mic resting on the moderator's empty chair and stepped into the light. The silence in the room was electric, charged, confused, expectant. She looked out at the crowd, then turned to Jasmine, who still stood behind the dead mic like a statue refusing to kneel. Yara's voice cut through the air, clear and unshakable. "If her mic's off," she said, her eyes locked on the audience, "then I'll be her mic tonight." The words hung for a second, suspended like a match just before it catches fire. Then it happened. A single clap, then another. Then the room erupted. Dozens of students stood first, then the back rows, then the center. The applause grew like a wave, not polite but pounding, not performative but defiant. Some people shouted her name. Others simply raised their fists. The moderator froze, unsure whether to intervene or disappear. Jasmine blinked once, then exhaled, her shoulders relaxing just enough to let something ancient and exhausted go. In that moment, the narrative they tried to control shattered. The girl with the safe image had just blown the doors off their script, and the crowd, once meant to witness a polished performance, had now become part of something real. Rebellion in real time. What began as a single sentence on a dying microphone didn't end in that room. It exploded far beyond it, traveling faster than any spotlight they could control. The first clip hit TikTok just 20 minutes after the moment unfolded. A shaky phone camera caught it all. Jasmine's mic dying mid-sentence, the moderator cutting her off, and Yara stepping into the frame like thunder without warning. The audio caught her voice perfectly. "If her mic's off, then I'll be her mic tonight." That line, raw, clean, defiant, landed like a lit match in a dry field. Within hours, it had been reposted across Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, stitched into edits with protest chants and courtroom montages, shared with captions like, "This is what allyship looks like," and "They tried to silence her. We made her louder." Views surged by the hundreds of thousands, then millions. By sunrise, "Let Her Speak" was trending globally. Not just a hashtag, a rallying cry. It appeared on signs in college campuses and on the backs of denim jackets. Artists reposted the clip in black and white with orchestral music swelling beneath it. Journalists rewrote their headlines overnight. Yara's line became a ringtone. Jasmine's frozen expression, caught between fury and restraint, was turned into digital art, a face staring back at the world with a look that asked, "Now that you see it, what will you do?" The internet didn't just react, it rose. And for one perfect moment, truth moved faster than suppression, but the backlash came just as fast. Within 12 hours, conservative pundits flooded morning news shows with new talking points. They labeled it a staged stunt, claimed Jasmine had orchestrated a victim narrative, and accused Yara of performative politics. One network played the clip 15 times in 1 hour, each time cutting off the part where Jasmine mentioned systemic injustice. The focus shifted. They dissected her tone, her posture, her earrings. "Is this professionalism?" one anchor asked. "Or manufactured outrage?" Think pieces flooded the media, some calling them heroes, others branding them agitators. Comment sections burned. Anonymous accounts began posting false claims that Jasmine had cursed at producers backstage, that Yara had refused to sign a media agreement. None of it was true, but the machine didn't care about truth. It only cared about volume. Behind the scenes, speaking invitations were pulled. Event sponsors paused endorsements. At least 2 universities canceled upcoming forums where Jasmine was set to appear, citing security concerns. Yara sat on the edge of her hotel bed, phone buzzing nonstop. Her inbox was split in two. Half thank yous, half warnings. "This is the price," she whispered to herself. On the other side of the city, Jasmine looked out the window of a silent car. "They don't fear our voices," she muttered. "They fear what happens when we give each other one." The system had struck back, but something had already shifted. Something it couldn't unmake. The moment had left the room. It now lived in millions of hands, reshared, reframed, and repeated. And every time someone pressed play, that microphone turned back on. But the louder their truth echoed, the more desperate the system became to drown it. Not with facts, but with fiction designed to destroy them. It started like a real video. Jasmine standing at a podium, her hands raised for emphasis, her voice firm. But something was off. The cadence was too sharp, the words slightly mismatched with her lips. Within seconds, it was clear. This wasn't footage from the summit. This was a deep fake. A digitally altered clip with Jasmine's image stitched onto manipulated audio. In it, she appeared to shout calls for resistance in the streets, for tearing down institutions, and burning the foundation of white law. Every line was false, crafted, edited, weaponized. But it spread like wildfire. Pushed by shadow accounts and retweeted by verified ones, the video was shared over 3 million times in 24 hours. The damage didn't wait for fact-checkers. Within hours, NBC pulled Yara's scheduled interview. No phone call, no explanation. Just a quiet cancellation email from a junior producer with a cold subject line. Segment cut, programming shift. It had taken weeks to coordinate that interview. A chance to speak directly, to reclaim the narrative. Now it was gone, replaced by reruns and talking heads dissecting a video that wasn't even real. Yara stared at the screen in disbelief. She called, texted, emailed. No one responded. Doors that had been wide open just days ago now slammed shut without sound. By noon, the collapse accelerated. A major cosmetics brand pulled its campaign with Yara, citing brand neutrality. A nonprofit Jasmine partnered with for criminal justice reform released a vague statement about needing to review affiliations. One by one, corporate sponsors vanished into silence, taking money, support, and visibility with them. Behind closed doors, contracts were quietly terminated. Their names were scrubbed from upcoming speaker lists. A publishing deal Jasmine had been negotiating for months was suddenly paused indefinitely. There were no scandals, no crimes, no public outbursts, only the illusion of danger, and that was enough. Jasmine stood by the window of her hotel suite. The city stretched out beneath her like a battlefield in waiting. Her phone was still lit with push notifications. Headlines, false reports, withdrawal notices. She didn't look at them anymore. "They think they're hurting me," she said, her voice low, sharp. "But they're not silencing me. They're just exposing how fragile their system really is." Her hands were clenched, not in fear, but in clarity, the kind that comes after enough blows to know where the next one will land. If a microphone threatens your democracy, then your democracy was never real. Yara sat on the couch behind her eyes bloodshot from sleepless hours, her laptop open, messages pouring in faster than she could read. She looked up, her voice calm but certain. "This isn't a speaking engagement anymore," she said. "This is a front line." The air between them was thick, not with panic, but with resolve. Jasmine turned from the window, eyes locked on Yara's. "They started this thinking they could erase one voice," she said, "but now they've got millions watching. Every time they try to shut me down, someone else picks up the mic." Yara nodded, slowly closing her laptop. "Then we don't wait for a platform. We build one they can't touch." It wasn't bravado. It was survival turned into strategy. Jasmine took a breath like someone preparing to walk back into fire. "Let them keep trying," she said, "because I'm not the one being burned. They are, by their own fear." And with that, they rose, not as victims, but as architects of a resistance that could no longer be contained. They had been pushed off the stage, smeared on screen, and erased from the schedule. But what came next would prove who was really afraid of the truth. It happened just after midnight, when most of the venue had gone quiet and the last of the media crews had packed up their lights. A backstage assistant, young, nervous, eyes darting like he knew he was breaking every rule in the handbook, found Yara and Jasmine in the service corridor behind the main auditorium. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I saw something," he said. "I wasn't supposed to, but if they're silencing you, you should see it too." They followed him past locked doors and storage crates labeled Civic Horizon AV property, past rows of silent screens and sound equipment, still humming in standby mode. At the end of the hallway, he keyed in a code to a restricted meeting room. No name on the door, just a keypad and a lock too advanced for anyone not meant to be there. The room was stark, all chrome edges and frosted glass. The kind of place where bad decisions wore suits and called themselves strategy. On the center table sat a thick binder marked "Confidential, Internal Use Only." Next to it, a laptop screen glowed with an open slideshow. Panel Management Protocol, Risk Mitigation for High-Impact Speakers. Jasmine stepped forward first. She opened the binder, flipped to the tabs already flagged in red. Her eyes didn't blink once. Yara leaned in beside her, reading line by line. There it was, in bullet points, in bold text, in the language of control disguised as caution. Monitor Crockett's remarks for deviation from pre-approved script. Audio cutoff enabled at discretion of floor producer. Flag keywords: systemic, racist, inequality, state violence. In event of off-script commentary, transition moderator to redirect audience attention. It was all there, word for word. Not conspiracy, not paranoia. Proof. Yara's breath caught in her throat, fury and disbelief colliding behind her ribs. She pulled out her phone and began snapping photos. The binder, the laptop screen, the timestamp. Flash off, fast hands, controlled rage. Jasmine was silent, but her hands were fists. "They didn't just expect me to be quiet," she said through clenched teeth. "They designed an entire system to make sure I stayed that way." The assistant shifted uncomfortably, his eyes never meeting theirs. "They told us this was standard protocol," he mumbled. "I thought it was just in case someone went off topic." Yara looked at him, her voice calm but carved from steel. "Truth isn't off topic, it's the whole damn point." Back at their hotel, the two women laid out the evidence on the bed like a war table. The photos, the documents, the audio from the panel that never aired. Every piece a weapon. Yara drafted the email herself, addressed to one name, Lena Torres, an investigative journalist known for cracking political cover-ups and burning bridges with corporate sponsors like they were dry leaves. Torres had covered police corruption, election fraud, and deep state surveillance. If anyone could handle this, it was her. Yara attached the files, double encrypted, and wrote just one line in the body of the email. They tried to silence the wrong women. As she hit send, the room felt heavier. Not with fear, but with certainty. Jasmine paced near the window, phone in hand, the city lights flickering below. "When this goes public," she said, "they'll say we made it all up." Yara nodded. "They'll scream fake news, overreaction, political theater." Jasmine turned, her eyes blazing now. "Let them, because this time, we're not just telling the truth. We're showing their fingerprints on the muzzle." Moments later, Torres replied. Just one line. "Meet me at 8, and bring everything." They had the evidence. They had the will. And now, for the first time since the summit began, they had a chance to speak. Not from a podium, not through a script, but on their own terms. The machine had tried to erase them, but in the process it left a trail, and Jasmine and Yara were ready to turn that trail into a firestorm. The room was dark except for the cold glow of a laptop screen. No studio lights, no handlers, no countdown music. Just Jasmine Crockett and Yara Shahidi, seated shoulder to shoulder in a hotel suite somewhere in D.C., their silhouettes lit only by truth and fire. Behind them, the city slept. But on the other side of the screen, The country was about to wake up. At exactly 8 p.m., Yara leaned forward and clicked the Go Live button. The screen flickered. Then, silence followed by Jasmine's voice. "We're not here tonight to make a statement," she said. "We're here to break a silence." No title card, no press team. Just two women sitting with nothing to lose, and a story too dangerous for the evening news. Jasmine didn't start with accusations. She started with facts. She recounted the summit, the invitation, the polite smiles, the moment her microphone was cut mid-sentence, the moment she spoke about systemic injustice. Her tone was calm, precise. "That was no technical error," she said. "It was a political decision." Yara followed, her voice lower, but no less deadly. "Within 2 hours, my interview was canceled. My face disappeared from their promos. I was told it was a coincidence. Then I got the email. If you defend her, you'll fall with her." She looked directly into the lens. "I'm still standing." They took turns, building their case like seasoned prosecutors. The audience wasn't treated like an audience. It was treated like a jury. Yara held up her phone and flipped through time-stamped photos, internal documents with redlining that read like blueprints for censorship. Jasmine showed pages from the binder, clearly labeled internal only, with directives like, "Cut mic upon mention of state violence or racial bias in law enforcement. Divert attention using moderator interjection if structural racism is referenced." Jasmine's voice dropped. "You don't invite someone to speak if you've already written their silence in advance." Then came the moment that split the screen like lightning. She leaned forward. "If the law can't protect our truth, then we'll become the law." The chat detonated. TikTokers clipped it in real time. Twitter ran red with hashtags. Within minutes, the phrase was plastered over protest posters, iPhone wallpapers, and digital billboards hacked by activists. Her voice, quiet, steady, had just rewritten the room they never wanted her to enter. And Yara followed, calm as a guillotine. "We are not your entertainment," she said. "We are your echo. We don't exist to soften the blow. We exist to return it. No applause, no dramatic music, just the truth, delivered like a scalpel in the dark." They didn't thank viewers. They didn't ask for donations. They didn't give a call to action. They closed the laptop. Just silence, and 2 seconds of black screen that felt louder than any speech. The impact, immediate. 2.3 million people watched it live. Within 6 hours, 9.7 million. Within 2 days, 22 million. The White House press secretary was asked about it during a briefing and offered a stiff, "We're reviewing the situation." That afternoon, 4 members of Congress called for an ethics investigation into the Civic Horizon Foundation. The summit moderators deleted their social accounts. Sponsors fled like rats from a sinking stage. But this wasn't about vengeance. It was about revelation. College classrooms replayed the live stream on loop. Professors rewrote lecture plans around it. Teenagers quoted it on subway walls in chalk and permanent marker. If the law can't protect our truth, then we'll become the law became more than a line. It became a generation's answer to silence. Reporters who once ignored Jasmine now begged for comment. Networks that dropped Yara requested exclusives. But they didn't rush back to microphones. They had learned, the microphone is not neutral, and neither is silence. When CNN asked for an interview, Jasmine responded with a single question. "Will I be allowed to finish a sentence this time?" They didn't just take control of the narrative. They shattered the myth that anyone else ever held it. By week's end, the echo was louder than the original event. Youth organizations adopted their language. Protesters projected their lines onto courthouse walls. Even skeptical politicians began echoing parts of their message, afraid to look outdated or worse, exposed. But the 2 women who lit the match didn't ask for followers. They weren't building a brand, they were building a firewall. Against silence, against erasure, against the lie that truth must come pre-approved to be heard. They didn't go viral. They went visible. Fully, fiercely, irrevocably. And somewhere in that same hotel room, long after the cameras went dark, Jasmine looked at Yara and said, not with triumph, but with steel in her voice, "They thought they could write us out of history, but they forgot. We write too." The live stream was over, but its aftershocks didn't fade. They detonated across institutions, cracked through policy, and forced the country to choose. Keep the silence or finally hear what had always been spoken in whispers. By the end of the week, the Civic Horizon Foundation was no longer just a name at the bottom of a press kit. It was the center of a political earthquake. The Senate Judiciary Subcommittee launched a formal inquiry into the foundation's funding practices and internal censorship protocols. Anonymous whistleblowers surfaced one by one, leaking emails, memos, and audio recordings that confirmed what Jasmine and Yara had shown the world. That silencing was not accidental. It was institutional, strategic, pre-approved. By Monday, major corporate sponsors withdrew their financial support. A six-figure partnership with a national bank vanished overnight. Two media groups canceled future summits. Board members resigned. Their mission statement was scrubbed from the website. Silence, once weaponized against two women, was now collapsing on the very system that created it. Across the country, state lawmakers could no longer pretend this was just a media flashpoint. In California, Illinois, and Georgia, three separate legislative proposals were introduced within days, all designed to protect the right to speak freely at publicly funded forums and academic events. The bills aim to outlaw covert editorial control over guest speakers, prevent audio censorship in live events, and mandate transparency from organizations hosting open dialogue. For the first time in years, bipartisan support was visible, not out of moral clarity, but political survival. No one wanted to be caught on the wrong side of a movement with 22 million eyes watching. While institutions scrambled to respond, academia responded with something different: reverence. Jasmine Crockett received formal honors from 5 major law schools within 2 weeks. Howard University hosted an emergency forum titled Voice, Law, and Power. The Crockett Doctrine, live-streamed to over 200,000 viewers. Harvard Law invited her to deliver the spring commencement address, an invitation extended only twice in the last 20 years to someone outside the judiciary. Students quoted her in final exams. Professors rewrote syllabi overnight. Her words had become precedent before the courts ever could. But amid the rising tide of invitations, think tank proposals, and even exploratory political offers, Yara remained still. When asked on air if she would consider running for office, her answer was quiet, clear, and devastating. "Not yet," she said, "because I don't want the next generation to run for microphones. I want to hand them one. I want to make sure they don't grow up asking permission to speak." That line became its own ripple, spreading through campuses and community centers like a gospel for the unheard. They had both been offered platforms before, but now they were the platform, and they didn't use it to rise. They used it to elevate others. Meanwhile, students across the country began organizing #Echo chapters, decentralized forums in schools and colleges where young people could speak freely without fear of being edited, cut, or sanitized. Some were raw, some were chaotic, all were real. A high school in Michigan named their auditorium after Jasmine Crockett. A community center in Atlanta built a youth-led panel on civic activism and called it the Yara Table. Every echo had a name now, and every name carried weight. The press tried to keep up, but the movement no longer belonged to press cycles. It belonged to memory, and memory had grown teeth. Back in D.C., as the Capitol debated whether to formally investigate broader media suppression trends, one senator stood and read Jasmine's livestream quote into the congressional record: "If the law can't protect our truth, then we'll become the law." It was the first time in decades that words spoken outside the Capitol carried more moral authority than anything spoken inside it. In private, Jasmine refused to celebrate. She knew what the system did to those it couldn't control. "This isn't justice," she told Yara during a quiet walk through Judiciary Square. "This is a crack, a fracture in the wall. Now we find out whether anyone is brave enough to step through it." And Yara, as always, answered not with hope, but with clarity. "If they don't, we will." The live stream had ended, but its pulse didn't. It traveled, not through scheduled news cycles or official press releases, but through shaky screen recordings, stitched Instagram reels, and TikToks subtitled in languages Jasmine had never spoken. Within hours, her voice was flying across borders faster than any government could contain. The truth had slipped through the cracks, and now it was leaking everywhere. In Paris, a group of student activists projected Jasmine's final words in blazing white letters across the Palais de Justice. If the law can't protect our truth, then we'll become the law. The police ordered them down. They refused. By morning, "Cheer devenez la loi" trended in France. Protesters stood in front of embassies holding hand-drawn signs. "Let her speak." A member of the French National Assembly quoted Yara's line during a hearing on police oversight. In Lagos, Nigeria, a 21-year-old woman named Ayodele streamed the video to a crowd of students under a canvas tent in a university courtyard. Many of them had never heard of Jasmine Crockett or Yara Shahidi. Most didn't know what the Civic Horizon Foundation was, but they didn't need the context. The moment they heard the mic cut off mid-sentence, the meaning landed. By the time the video ended, the crowd was chanting in sync, "We are not your entertainment, we are your echo." The clip made local news. The phrase made it onto street murals within days. In Seoul, a law student translated the entire transcript into 6 languages and posted it on a public drive titled, "For every woman who's been interrupted." In Mumbai, teens painted the quote across school walls. In Santiago, high schoolers walked out of class in silence, with the live-stream transcript pinned to their uniforms. In Tunis, a radio station aired Jasmine's speech daily, calling it the most important courtroom testimony never given in court. It wasn't America's reckoning anymore. It was everyone's. Then the global institutions caught up. The United Nations Human Rights Council added the incident to its emergency review docket. 3 special rapporteurs issued a joint statement condemning digital censorship, specifically naming private entities that stifled political speech. Amnesty International dubbed Jasmine and Yara's livestream a paradigm shift in whistleblower communication. Human Rights Watch cited the case in a report on platform manipulation and algorithmic bias, but as admiration poured in, so did distortion. State-run media in Russia ran nightly segments titled "The Death of American Free Speech," featuring Jasmine's cut mic moment on repeat. Chinese broadcasters subtitled the entire stream and ran it in prime time, framing it as proof that Western democracy had collapsed under its own hypocrisy. While the world embraced their words, regimes twisted them. Their truth had traveled so far, it now had to survive outside their control. Jasmine knew the weight of it when she woke up to her voice dubbed in Mandarin over a state news anchor. "This isn't what I meant," she whispered. But it was too late. She and Yara weren't just women anymore. They were symbols, tools, threats, weapons, depending on who held the remote. So they did what they always did, reclaim the mic. Jasmine released a quiet video, no press, no graphics, just her in a hoodie, speaking directly to the camera. "This isn't a war between nations," she said. "It's a fight between those who hoard power and those forced to whisper the truth. If you've ever been told to wait, to shrink, to soften, this moment is yours too." The video was subtitled into 32 languages within a week. Meanwhile, Yara received an invitation to speak at the Global Summit on Press Freedom in The Hague. She declined. Instead, she sent a proposal: fund 50 youth-run media hubs around the world. "Don't fly me in to speak," she wrote. "Use that ticket to buy someone else a microphone." The summit board approved it unanimously. They had never intended to become global leaders, but what they became was more dangerous. Global permission, not permission to rebel, permission to speak, and that permission ignited movement. In Brazil, a feminist collective launched a pirate radio station called Voz delas, their voice, broadcasting political poetry, protest speeches, and survivor testimonies. In Tunisia, female journalists formed a network named Echo Circle, designed to amplify silenced voices and protect reporters at risk. In Sydney, 2 teenage girls built a peer-led media app, aggregating raw news footage from over 20 countries. They called it Resonance. They didn't ask to go viral. They asked to be heard. And when the world listened, it didn't applaud, it responded. Within 2 weeks, 3,100 independent subtitled versions of the livestream existed online. Over 150 million combined views across platforms. A data analytics firm reported more global interactions with Jasmine and Yara's speech than with the last U.S. presidential address. Google Trends lit up with one question: who is Jasmine Crockett? But the most powerful moment came quietly. A teacher in South Africa filmed her fifth-grade students reciting Jasmine's quote in unison. In Kenya, a girl too shy to speak in class wrote a poem based entirely on Yara's line, "We are your echo." In a Syrian refugee camp, a smuggled phone played the stream on loop. No one translated it, but everyone watching understood. Because some things don't need subtitles, they just need a signal. And now that signal had crossed oceans. The silence didn't last long. It never does when power feels cornered. By the time Jasmine and Yara's stream passed 50 million views globally, the machinery that had failed to contain them began to reassemble. This time not with cords and mics, but with weapons honed behind closed doors. The media storm they had set off wasn't just burning down systems, it was threatening careers, donors, institutions that depended on silence packaged as neutrality. And those who'd been exposed weren't just embarrassed, they were angry. The first blow came quiet and anonymous, just like the threats that arrived before the livestream. A new video began circulating, heavily edited, clipped together with ominous music and subtle distortion. It showed Jasmine at a past rally, her voice raised in anger, layered with protest footage, fires, and the sound of glass shattering, none of which had anything to do with her. The voiceover whispered, "Is this who we let speak for us?" The source, unknown. The platform, everywhere. Next came the headlines. From hero to hysterical, Yara's echo or Jasmine's agenda. The weaponization of wokeness. How two women hijacked the national stage. A right-wing network ran a 48-hour loop dissecting Jasmine's quote out of context, stripping it down to 5 words. "Will become the law." They labeled it a threat. They called it insurrection. They ran side-by-side comparisons of her and footage from January 6th. On social media, bot networks amplified the smear. Fake accounts posed as concerned parents, disillusioned students, even former supporters claiming they felt tricked. A conservative columnist published an article alleging Jasmine had ties to radical international groups based on a mistranslated activist post from Brazil. It was all smoke, but the fire it fueled was real. Then came the data breach. Yara's private messages were leaked. Years of texts, emails, voice memos. Most were harmless, some were personal. One showed her venting frustration about the Democratic Party's silence. It was enough. The news cycle pounced. Suddenly, she was no longer a symbol of hope. She was a divisive figure. One anchor even referred to her as unstable, citing her emotional tone during interviews. No one mentioned she'd been 22 when it all began. Sponsors pulled back. Schools that had invited Jasmine now asked her to postpone. Major platforms flagged their content for fact-checking, even when it was their own footage. Someone filed a FOIA request for Jasmine's congressional records, an intimidation tactic wrapped in paperwork. And still, the women stood. But this time, they didn't just speak. They struck back. At 7 p.m. on a Wednesday night, Jasmine released a 10-minute video titled, "Receipts." No music, no drama. Just her sitting at a desk, scrolling through every false headline with timestamps, source credits, and direct contradictions from the outlets themselves. She didn't raise her voice once. Her fury came in the form of clarity so sharp it cut cleaner than outrage ever could. Yara followed with a live stream titled, "Here's What They Didn't Show You." She played the full, unedited version of the deepfake video, the one that had twisted Jasmine's rally speech. Then she brought on the journalist who had originally filmed it, who confirmed live that the recent version was manipulated. The comments section exploded. Viewers started sharing side-by-side comparisons, tearing down the smear campaign faster than it could regenerate. Then Jasmine and Yara did the one thing no one expected. They turned their fire outward, not just at the institutions that tried to silence them, but at the playbook of silence itself. Jasmine spoke directly to young activists. This is the cost. They'll gaslight your footage, they'll edit your emotion, they'll weaponize your hope. But you keep going, because the minute they try to erase you, you know you're onto something they fear. Yara created a digital archive called Refused Edits, a crowdsourced database of politically censored speeches, student protests suppressed by schools, whistleblower clips taken down for violating terms, thousands uploaded within days. TikTokers stitched their own versions. Journalists began referencing the archive in exposés about algorithmic suppression. The media couldn't contain it anymore. They tried interviews, damage control, new headlines. But Jasmine and Yara weren't giving them sound bites. They were giving them back their silence and letting it speak for itself. And then came the moment that flipped the narrative on its head. A leaked memo surfaced from a lobbying firm tied to Civic Horizon, revealing a months-long strategy to neutralize political disruptors through narrative inversion and emotional discreditation. Attached were profiles of both Jasmine and Yara, complete with media weak points, preferred framing suggestions, and lists of advisable surrogate voices, influencers, anchors, academics, paid to question their credibility. It wasn't a theory, it was proof. The document went viral. Overnight, the smear became the scandal. News outlets that had aired the edited clips issued statements, not apologies, but clarifications. Public figures who had criticized the women quietly deleted their tweets. A major podcast host read the entire memo aloud on air and ended the episode by saying, "I've been played. We all have." The narrative had turned, but for Jasmine and Yara, the damage wasn't undone. It never is. The calls from schools didn't return. The sponsors didn't reappear. But something better emerged. Credibility. Unshakable. Unbought. A deeper loyalty from the people who watched them weather not just censorship, but retaliation, and still speak. When asked in a town hall what she would say to young women afraid of the same backlash, Jasmine didn't hesitate. "They're going to come for you either way," she said, "so make sure you give them something they can't forget." And Yara, when asked what gave her strength to endure it, simply said, "Because someone else has to speak after me, and I refuse to let them inherit silence." They didn't ask for war, but when it came, they answered. Not with rage, but with record. Not with vengeance, but with vision. Not with flame, but with truth. And the kind of echo that even power can't drown. It didn't end with a press conference. There were no fireworks, no headlines declaring victory, no banner reading, "We won." In fact, there was no single moment where the system collapsed or changed overnight. What Jasmine Crockett and Yara Shahidi had done was something far less glamorous and far more dangerous. They endured, and in that endurance, they rewrote what power could never touch. Months after the storm, Jasmine stood beneath a canopy of oak trees at an old university in South Carolina. The air smelled of wet stone and chalk dust. Students buzzed around her, some whispering, some bold enough to walk up and say thank you. But Jasmine's eyes were on the small bronze plaque just unveiled beside a lecture hall. Crockett Hall, not named by donors, not approved by trustees, voted in by students, carved by their voices. As cameras flashed and officials clapped, Jasmine didn't smile, not out of pride, but weight. She knew what that name cost. Every letter etched into the metal came from sleepless nights, burned bridges, and the kind of silence that doesn't echo. It chokes. And now it stood not as an award, but a warning. A reminder that truth doesn't always survive because it's protected. Sometimes it survives because someone refused to let it die. Across the country, Yara was in a different kind of room. A small, windowless space at a community center in Oakland. No cameras, no speeches. Just 13 teenage girls sitting in a circle with mics on borrowed tripods and clipboards filled with interview notes. They were building a podcast network, one Yara had helped fund but refused to take credit for. She sat on the floor with them, cross-legged, listening more than speaking. One of the girls asked, "Why didn't you run for Congress? You could win." Yara paused, looked around, and then said, "Because I don't want to be the one holding the mic." She pointed to the girl. "I want to be the one handing it to you." The room went silent. Then one by one they nodded. In the months since the live stream, a quiet revolution had begun, not in voting booths or courtrooms, but in whispered decisions and private defiance. Teachers who once skipped the topic now played the video in class. Students stopped asking for permission before organizing forums. Activists launched local echo pods. Open mic spaces in libraries, gyms, parks, anywhere voices could breathe. Not everything changed. Not yet. Major networks still hesitated to feature Jasmine. Yara remained locked out of the corporate circles that once sought her as a brand, not a voice. But they no longer needed those gates. They had cracked the culture behind them, and cracks, as they knew, were how light gets in. In a quiet suburb of Atlanta, a mother named Denise stood outside a school board, meeting with a sign. "I'm not here because I want to be loud. I'm here because someone taught me I don't have to be silent." In a village in the Philippines, a teenage journalist started a newsletter using only WhatsApp, entitled it Mic Drop. The first edition quoted Jasmine's line. In Germany, a university offered a new course, Silent Speech, from Cicero to Crockett. Jasmine and Yara watched all of it unfold, not as leaders but as witnesses. They had become more than names. They had become methods. One night, Jasmine returned to the hotel where they had streamed the original broadcast. She asked for the same suite. It hadn't changed. Same curtains, same desk, same spot where they had closed the laptop and changed the conversation. She sat in the chair, alone now, and whispered, "They'll try again." But the difference now was this. There would be thousands ready, not to follow, but to stand, not to repeat, but to respond. Weeks later, she received a letter, handwritten, folded into a school report from a 10-year-old girl in Kentucky. It said, "They cut your mic, but I heard you anyway. I think maybe I want to be a lawyer now, or maybe a poet, or both." Jasmine kept it folded in her wallet, not as sentiment, but as strategy, because every girl like that was one fewer whisper lost. At a small conference with no live stream, no headline coverage, and no red carpet, Yara spoke just once to a crowd of educators. No theatrics. Just this. You don't need to become loud to be heard. You need to become undeniable. That was what power couldn't kill. Not volume, not visibility, but undeniability. The kind that survives microphones being cut. The kind that lives on in chalk on pavement. The kind that echoes not in rooms built for power, but in those that steal it back. The movement never had a name. It didn't need one, because the people who carried it didn't shout its title. They lived its message. And in every quiet act of resistance, in every whispered "I heard her too," in every chalk sidewalk and secondhand podcast, in every voice that dared not to ask for the mic, but to take it, they proved one thing. What power tries to kill, truth, echo, memory, fire, never dies. It multiplies. And when the last camera shut off, when the world caught its breath, one question still remained. One louder than applause, stronger than backlash, and more urgent than ever. What did this really mean? It meant that justice isn't always delivered in marble rooms or written in legal ink. It's often carved in whispers, in broken sentences, in the spaces where truth is told and then punished for its volume. Jasmine Crockett and Yara Shahidi did not step onto a battlefield with armor or banners. They walked into a room built to absorb their light and dared to turn up the brightness. They weren't fighting to be heard. They were fighting for the right to finish a sentence without interruption, to speak of injustice without fear of being edited, and to stand in the open without being reduced to a soundbite. The microphones weren't just tools. They were gatekeepers. And when the gate slammed shut, they didn't knock. They broke it. With their words, with their presence, with the undeniable weight of being women who refused to shrink. The story isn't about two people who went viral. It's about two people who survived being silenced and then weaponized the silence. They turned censorship into a stage, threats into fuel, and fear into direction. The systems that tried to erase them had done it before, quietly, efficiently, and often without resistance. But this time, the system met women who didn't just resist. They remembered. They documented. They responded in real time, with receipts, with truth, and with a courage that didn't blink even when the world turned its back. And that's the lesson. The difference between collapse and change is often one person refusing to shut up. What Jasmine and Yara proved is that injustice doesn't always wear a uniform or bang a gavel. Sometimes it smiles from behind a press badge. Sometimes it cuts your mic while calling you valued. Sometimes it hides in a panel agenda or in the soft-spoken moderator who steers your story off course. But the most dangerous kind of injustice, it's the kind that cloaks itself in professionalism. Polite, 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 until you realize you were erased without anyone ever raising their voice. Jasmine saw it, Yara felt it, and they didn't just survive it. They pulled the curtain off so everyone else could see too. This isn't just a story about race or gender or power. It's about erasure, about how society polices voices not with force, but with silence. And the deeper truth is this: people aren't silenced when they scream. They're silenced when no one listens after. What Jasmine and Yara built wasn't a moment, it was a mirror, held up to the institutions that still choose comfort over correction, held up to audiences that cheer for bravery, but turn the volume down when the truth starts to sting. Held up to us. The human message underneath all the fire is this: your voice is not optional. It is not decoration. It is not a privilege handed to you by media contracts or speaking invites. It is your first weapon, your final defense, your birthright. And when it's threatened, when it's challenged by power that thinks it owns the narrative, your job isn't just to hold on to it. Your job is to hand it to the person behind you, and then the person behind them, until the echo becomes so loud no system built on silence can hold. Jasmine didn't break the law. She broke the illusion that law alone was enough. Yara didn't hijack a moment. She took back the space that was stolen. Together they proved that resistance isn't always loud. It's persistent. And sometimes the most radical thing a woman can do is not shut up, to say no when everything around her says not now, to document the injustice before it's buried, and to choose visibility even when it becomes a target painted on her back. In the end, this story leaves us with more than hashtags. It leaves us with a challenge. What will you do when they cut your mic? What will you say when you realize the room wasn't built for your voice? Will you whisper? Or will you build your own room, your own signal, your own law? Because when power meets truth, it always flinches. And when truth speaks back, it never dies, it multiplies. So now that you've heard their story, not just the words, but the fight beneath them, there's only one thing left to ask. What will you do with it? Don't just share the video. Don't just quote the line. Don't just nod and whisper powerful, because the truth Jasmine and Yara carried didn't survive so we could admire it. It survived so we could use it. You've seen what happens when silence is exposed, when the mic cuts, when the platform folds, when power tries to turn women into props and resistance into spectacle. You've seen them bleed for every sentence they got to finish. Now it's your turn. Speak when it's uncomfortable. Document what they want hidden. Ask the hard questions when they hand you the soft script. Show up in rooms you were never meant to enter, and speak like you were never planning to leave. Because the system doesn't fear noise. It fears memory. It fears people who remember the lies and refuse to repeat them. Start a forum in your school. Create your own live stream. Amplify the voice that was cut off mid-sentence. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for a title. Don't wait for safety. Because power never hands you a mic. It hands you silence and dares you to fight for sound. Fight, not with fists, but with footage. Not with rage, but with record. Tell your story before someone else edits it to fit theirs. And if they call you too loud, too sharp, too much, remember Jasmine. Remember Yara. Remember what happened when they didn't flinch. Then look them in the eye and say, I am not here to be quiet. I am here to finish the sentence. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.